Claire Chumley. It's so good to see you again. Claire and I have known each other for a long time. She started her career at AHA Process. And when did you decide to be a teacher?
Um, I thought about it off and on a lot. I learned so much working at AHA Process. I was intimidated of being a teacher because I grew up, my mother was a teacher and I saw all the grading and the work that she did. But I became a teacher when I was 30, and I just slowly kind of realized I could be my own self. I didn't have to be my mom, and I could figure that out. And I love sharing the learning and explaining things and all. So it was the right choice for me.
Cool. And what do you teach?
I teach English. I teach high school English, and I've taught all the grade levels at high school. And right now, I teach 11th grade, so junior English, and it's American Lit.
Oh, very cool. So you worked for Ruby Payne for how many years? What are those top things that you learned from working with Ruby and her books that you think really benefited you as a teacher?
I worked for Ruby for 7 years, and I really got to know the content really well. While I worked for her, I got to help answer questions for people who called in. So I really got to know that stuff well. I think the biggest things that I use a lot, I learned number one, not to blame students and not to take things personally that happen in the classroom. Some examples of that would be like the registers of language. So I learned from Ruby that we speak the way we speak because of the way that we're raised, because of the background we come from. And I realized too, like that includes me. I have a deep East Texas kind of hick in me, and I can talk like that. And I'll tell my students that, I know when to speak that way with my family. And I know how to speak at school or in academic settings or formal settings. And so that's an example of something I learned from her that I still teach my students, so that there's no disrespect to the home culture or the background. We just need to learn how to switch for the appropriate situations. I think also thinking like content wise, I learned how to deal with the large amounts of content that you have to use as a teacher. I'm thinking kind of the mental models. I remember hearing Ruby talk about patterns. She was specifically talking about the big patterns of history, and that if you know these patterns in history, then you can fit events and people into those patterns, and it's so much easier to learn. And literature has the same thing. Stories have patterns. The history of literature has patterns, so different literary movements. So that was a big one to me. I have more. I can share more if you want.
Oh, please do.
Okay. Also, I think behaviorally with the students, another thing that comes to mind, I remember Ruby talking about when a student gets in trouble in class or something and they start laughing or at least smile at you, your reaction as a teacher is to get mad, like they're disrespecting me. Why are they acting like this? And so learning from her that that is a way to save face and for them to feel better in that moment. I just ignore it. I just ignore it if they start kind of laughing or smiling. As long as they're not actually saying or doing anything else, I just go with it because they're trying, they have to be here and they're trying to save face and feel like a respected person as well. So I learned from her to show them that respect so that we can build that relationship and they will respect me as well. I think I also just really gained this idea that there is always a solution or something that you can do to improve the situation. So as teachers, we want to fix everything or save everything for kids that we really care about. And so I'm looking at like 130 kids a day, and I care about all of them. and I want to fix things that are out of my control to fix. And so in my classroom, there are always things I can do to improve their experience in here. And if they're struggling to learn for whatever reason, there are tools, ways that I can make the content manageable for them. And Ruby provided things that were behavioral, but also content, breaking down content for kids based on the way their brain is working at the time. So I got a lot from the AHA process work that gave me a really solid background to start teaching.
Good. So you've been teaching now for some time. What has changed?
This is my 14th year, and obviously that covers COVID, so that big change. I think the students, we talk about like the way the brain works. I think there's been a lot of change in the way students' brains work. And I hear people say things like kids just aren't as smart as they used to be. But I know my students, and they're not less smart. They have been raised on entertainment and things like TikTok, things that move really fast, and their brains do not work the same way. And that's a big change I've seen. I tell them, hey, your brain's been trained to see things in 15-second chunks, and it's always looking for the next entertainment. And you want to grow this part of you that can read a whole book, or that can read something for an hour without having to be entertained in between. And a lot of them are really receptive to that, even though it's hard because they've been raised differently. Changes in education. The percentage of students that I have who have some kind of paperwork, like an IEP or a 504 plan, or who are English language learners, and so they have accommodations for that, that percentage has really gone up. I think about close to 40% of my students this year. Now, I do have some inclusion classes, not all of them, but some. But about 40% of my students have that stuff. So the level of that individual accommodating has changed a lot over the years that I've been teaching. And in the spirit of it, it's great. Like, I want to meet every student where they are, and I work really hard to do that. But that is a lot of work for 130 kids where you're trying to individualize things. I think probably another big change that affects things is in education, just from all different forces. We have really changed who bears the responsibility for learning. And I do believe that as teachers, we bear a responsibility to meet students where they are, teach them, but also be responsible for presenting content in ways that works for them. So it's not enough to just throw it out there and say you need to learn it. But especially since COVID, the number of absences has drastically increased, and it is on the teacher to try to make up for that or accommodate for that somehow. And it's huge compared to how it used to be. Students don't feel any real sense of urgency or responsibility for doing makeup work or for coming in when they've been absent. That's a thing I have to teach them and try to create in them, to take some responsibility for picking up what they missed. That has changed a lot. When I first started teaching, there were more students and parents who understood when you miss school, you have to do your makeup work. And now we just have to kind of try to absorb it during class time. And that can be really difficult.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel like you have the tools for those changes that you're seeing?
Not enough to compensate for the amount. I think a lot about like paperwork. I've referenced things that have to do with paperwork. So that is such a huge burden. What tools do we have to balance that with still spending time designing effective instruction or giving feedback to students? So I don't know what the answer is to that, but some tools would be good for that.
So, what do you do well as a teacher?
um, I am very proud of my content knowledge. I'm a resource for other teachers. When I need to teach something and I don't know it, I study it and I learn it and I get a lot of perspectives on it. I dig into it myself and make sure that I'm comfortable with it. And so I'm really strong in content knowledge. I'm very accurate. And Ruth, I think you gave me a lot of things to do when I worked at AHA because of my accuracy and how I could pull things and get just the right thing that you needed. Yes. So that just made me remember that. But I'm very accurate. So the data that we have to work with, the grades, my grades are meaningful. And that's another place where I'm a resource to other teachers because they'll ask me, how are you going to handle this? What are you going to do so that it's fair? And so that shows up in that way, and it shows up in my content. I am not going to teach something that I'm not clear and accurate on. And I'm growing all the time in it. But that's very important to me. I'm not good with being tossed a lesson and told, this is what you're doing. I need to learn it. So I think those are the main strengths that come to mind.
So, what for those of you watching, Claire and I worked very closely together when she worked for AHA, and in my memory, we had a lot of good times too. Claire, what would you like support on? You're not a new teacher. You haven't been teaching for 25 years. What would you like supports on now that the world is what it is?
Um, I think probably the thing that I struggle with the most is the amount of input and feedback, or I don't know if feedback is the right word in this situation, but I'm asked to complete forms and to give data and to report on individual students a lot. So multiple times through the IEP process for 504s, for language learners, and sometimes just for students who are struggling in some other way. And I know my students, and as the year goes on, that's a thing I can do. But with the sheer number that we're having to do now, when I think about supports, I would like some way to track that information that does not infringe so much on what we're doing in the classroom. So when you have to report that data all the time, that means you have to spend class time collecting data. And as teachers, we are always, assessing where our students are and responding to that. But I need numbers, so we need to take 10 minutes and everyone needs to complete this little, formative assessment so that I have some data and I can say how you did on it. That has value. It feels like it's just growing and growing, how much we need to do it. And I need to be able to do that in a way that does not devalue my students' humanity. So that's really hard. And then probably supports for individualizing things. The focus is on individual education, meeting students where they are, giving them the accommodations they need. So when you have 130 to 150 students, what are ways to do that where in a timely manner that a teacher can handle? Yeah.
Okay, thanks. So is there anything you'd like to tell me that I didn't ask you about?
I love my job and I love my students. I love my content, and those things make me smile every day and keep me going. However much students change, I still see these kids. I hang out with them every day, talk to them about their lives in any moments where we can, and especially if I can work it in to what we're reading and discussing. They care and they want to do well. And so when they're frustrated, it is good to have the tools to give them. But I think mostly just basically that I love them and I love what I do so much. And so I want the tools and the ways to do things better, to do my job better.
Sure, sure. Well, thank you so much. And I can see your passion when you talk. And I should come to your classroom and sit in the back someday.
Yes, you should. You can brush up on some literature too.
Right. Well, I appreciate your time and letting us share about your life as an educator with others and some of those great tools that you learned from Ruby. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity.